question 9, as I look at my two denominators, I have two binomials, x minus 2 and x plus 8. When I first teach this to students, they'll usually say yes, they have x in common. But the answer to that question is no, because this is a binomial and this is a binomial. To have anything in common, they would have to both be have a common factor of 2, for example. We want to take out your greatest common factor first. So I would say to you, these have nothing in common. So my least common multiple would be both of them multiplied by each other. So that's what I'm going to put over here. I'll show you in a moment. A lot of Algebra 2 teachers would just, and I swapped the order of those and it really doesn't matter, would just automatically put one denominator. And maybe I'll go back and show you that in just a moment. You are welcome to do that by just putting one denominator, but I think it's clearer to see this way first and then just put one denominator. Okay, maybe I'll do that with the last example. All right, so this denominator, how do I transform this denominator into this denominator? I would multiply by x minus 8. Excuse me, x plus 8. So that means I need to multiply my numerator by x plus 8. And you do want to distribute and put down the answer that you get. 15 times x is 15x. 15 times 8 is what? 120? Let me think about that mentally for a moment. Yes. Then, when I look at my next denominator, how do I transform this denominator to look like this denominator? I would multiply x plus 8 by x minus 2. So then I'm going to multiply 3 times the quantity x minus 2. 3x minus 6. Now I have a common denominator. That common denominator is x plus 8 times x minus 2. Now combine like terms in the numerator. 15x plus 3x is 18x. And 120 minus 6, positive 114. Now, those do have a common factor. Let me just do some sketching over here. They have 2 in common, so that would be 9x plus, what would it be, 57? Yes. And if I would factor out 2, can I reduce anything? I have a monomial. 2 is my only monomial, so I couldn't reduce anything with 2. 9x plus 57, are those the same? No. So then I can just leave this fraction alone. I don't have to. When you're adding and subtracting, you do not have to factor the numerator. You may leave it just as 18x plus 114. Let's move on to question 10. I need to factor this denominator here. I need factors of negative 6 that will give me a sum of negative 5. That would be negative 6 times positive 1. Again, I'll use bottoms up. I am going to divide each of those by 2. So this will actually factor into x minus 3 times 2x plus 1. So when I'm thinking about the least common multiple for number 10, or the least common denominator for number 10, I should say. My first denominator is 2x plus 1. My second denominator is x minus 3 times 2x plus 1. Do they have anything in common? Yes, they have 2x plus 1 in common. Then x minus 3 does not have anything in common with that first denominator, but it has to be included in my common denominator. So I'm going to put 2x plus 1 times x minus 3 in the denominator of each fraction. It does not matter the order in which you put those at all. Then I'm going to make equivalent fractions like you do when you add and subtract fractions. What can I do to transform this denominator into this denominator? I can multiply by x minus 3. 3x times x, I'm going to distribute, remember 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times negative 3 is negative 9x. Then for my next group, what can I do to transform this denominator into this denominator? Well, nothing. I can multiply by 1 because it is the same thing. So then I really don't have to do anything but keep that fraction as it is. And now I can check for like terms in my numerator because I have my common denominator completed. 2x plus 1 times x minus 3. Do I have like terms? No. So I've got 3x squared minus 9x plus 10. I do need to check to see if this trinomial will factor because I may be able to reduce. So I'm going to see if I can find factors of 30 that will give me a sum of negative 9. Negative 15 times 2. Negative 10 times 3. 4 will not go into 30. Negative 6 times 5. And none of those add to give me negative 9. So then that would mean this is going to be my answer. Okay, moving on to number 11. I need to factor this denominator, and I'm going to go ahead and list, there's my first denominator, and you can't see that, I apologize. There's my first denominator, here's my second denominator, and then this one, I'm going to have factors of negative 7 that will give me a sum of negative 6, and that would be x minus 7 times x plus 1. Now, when you're looking for the least common multiple, is there anything that all three of these denominators have? No. Then, is there another x minus 7? Yes. So x minus 7 is included in my common denominator. And then also x plus 1. So my common denominator, I'm going to show you on this one what I meant. A lot of Algebra 2 teachers will just tell you to go ahead and write one denominator. If you prefer this way, that's perfectly fine. It does save writing. You don't have to write x minus 7 times x plus 1 3 times. Okay, so then you still do the same thing. How do I transform this denominator into this denominator? Well, I would multiply by x plus 1. So distribute. X times x is x squared. X times 1 is positive x. Then you would ask yourself, how would you transform the second denominator into the new denominator? Well, you're going to multiply by x minus 7. Now, I want you to notice that you're going to distribute negative 2. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative 2 times negative 7 is positive 14. Then I'm going to see what I need to do, if anything, how to transform this denominator into this denominator. And since they are the same, you're really not doing anything. You're multiplying by 1. So then I have minus 8x times 1, which is minus 8x. So that's what I meant earlier on question 9, that many Algebra 2 teachers will just tell you to write your common denominator one time. I was taught to do it this way. Whichever way you prefer is perfectly fine with me as long as you understand. Now I'm going to keep my common denominator. And I'm going to combine like terms, nothing to combine with x squared. X minus 2x is negative 1x. Negative 1x minus 8x is negative 9x. And then bring down my plus 14. Now, I do have to check to make sure I can't reduce. So, I am going to try to find factors of 14 that will give me a sum of negative 9. And that would be negative 2 times negative 7 gives me positive 14 and adds to give me negative 9. I want you to notice one of my factors will be x minus 7. Is there a factor in the denominator that's x minus 7? Yes, there is. So I need to factor my numerator into x minus 2 times x minus 7. Write down my denominator, x minus 7 times x plus 1. I need to reduce the part of the fraction that can be reduced, and my final answer is x minus 2 times x plus 1. Remember, you may not mark out the x's. That is not mathematically allowed. Now, I'm going to do the next two problems on the next video.